The house on Grosvenor Square had always been beautiful in the way that tombs are beautiful, impeccably maintained, coldly elegant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Its windows caught the afternoon light with practiced perfection, reflecting nothing of what transpired within those walls. To the passers-by who occasionally glanced up at its pristine facade, it was simply another residence of quality, indistinguishable from the dozens of other fine homes that lined that fashionable London street. They could not have known that within those walls a young woman existed in a state of perpetual erasure. Rowena Calder had learned the art of invisibility not by choice, but by necessity. At 23, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that might have turned heads in any ballroom had she ever been permitted to enter one. Her dark hair held a natural wave that caught the light when she moved, and her eyes, a peculiar shade of amber that seemed to shift between gold and brown depending on her mood, held an intelligence that years of isolation had only sharpened. But these qualities meant nothing when no one beyond the household staff ever laid eyes upon her. Her father, the late Thomas Calder, had been a gentleman of modest fortune and impeccable character. His death 5 years prior had delivered Rowena into the guardianship of his widow, the woman who had become Lady Agatha Whitmore upon her subsequent marriage to Lord Edmund Whitmore. That union had elevated Agatha's social standing considerably, transforming her from the wife of a respectable gentleman into the spouse of a baron with connections to some of London's most influential families. It had also sealed Rowena's fate. Lady Agatha had calculated her stepdaughter's value with the precision of a merchant weighing gold. Rowena's modest inheritance was enough to warrant control, but not enough to command respect. Her beauty was sufficient to pose a threat to Agatha's own daughters from her new marriage, two insipid girls named Millicent and Cordelia, neither of whom possessed half of Rowena's natural grace or wit. The solution, in Agatha's mind, was elegantly simple: make Rowena disappear without actually disposing of her. The invisibility began gradually. First came the excuses. Rowena was indisposed. Rowena was attending to domestic matters. Rowena preferred the quiet of home to the bustle of society. Then came the systematic removal from guest lists, the declined invitations that Rowena never knew had been extended, the careful orchestration of her absence from every social occasion that might have introduced her to potential suitors or allies. Within a year of her father's death, Rowena had become a ghost in her own life. She occupied the 3rd floor of the Grosvenor Square residence in rooms that had once served as guest quarters. They were comfortable enough. Lady Agatha was not unnecessarily cruel in material matters, but they were positioned as far from the main living areas as possible. When visitors came, Rowena was expected to remain in her rooms. When the family entertained, she ate her meals on a tray delivered by one of the maids. When Lord and Lady Whitmore attended balls or soirees, Rowena watched from her window as their carriage pulled away, carrying her stepsisters to the glittering world she would never be permitted to enter. The servants knew of her existence, of course, but they had been carefully selected for their discretion and their dependence on Lady Agatha's goodwill. They brought Rowena her meals, maintained her rooms, and spoke to her with a mixture of pity and caution. They understood that acknowledging her too openly might cost them their positions. In the carefully constructed hierarchy of the household, Rowena existed in a peculiar limbo, above the servants in birth, below them in freedom. She filled her days with reading, needlework, and the careful cultivation of a dignity that refused to be extinguished. The library, mercifully, had been her father's domain, and Lady Agatha had little interest in books beyond their decorative value. Rowena had read everything from philosophy to poetry, from history to the scandalous novels that her stepmother would have burned had she known of their presence. These books became her windows to a world she could not access, her companions in a solitude that might otherwise have driven her to despair. But solitude, Rowena had discovered, could also be a teacher. In the silence, she had learned to observe, to analyze, to see through the pretenses that governed social interactions. She understood her stepmother's machinations with perfect clarity, recognized the calculated cruelty beneath the veneer of propriety. She knew that Millicent and Cordelia, for all their advantages, would never possess the strength of character that adversity had forged in her. This knowledge sustained her through the long, empty days, She had almost convinced herself that this half-life would be her permanent condition when everything changed on a cold November evening. The day had begun unremarkably. Rowena had taken her breakfast in her rooms, spent the morning reading Dante's Inferno in the original Italian, a language she had taught herself from books, and passed the afternoon with her embroidery near the window, where the light was best. As dusk approached, she heard the familiar sounds of preparation below. Lady Agatha was hosting a small dinner party, nothing elaborate, merely a gathering of influential acquaintances whose favor she assiduously cultivated. Rowena had learned not to feel the sting of exclusion anymore, or rather, she had learned to bury that sting so deeply that it rarely surfaced. She would remain upstairs as always, invisible and forgotten. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. Rowena heard the carriages, the opening and closing of doors, the murmur of greetings exchanged in the entrance hall. She recognized some voices: Lord Pemberton with his pompous laugh, Mrs. Ashworth with her affected simper. Then came a voice she did not know, deep and measured, with an authority that seemed to silence the chittering conversation around it. "Your Grace! What an unexpected honor!" Lady Agatha's voice carried up the stairs, pitched higher than usual with barely concealed excitement. Rowena moved closer to her door, curiosity piqued. A duke. Lady Agatha had never managed to secure a duke's attendance before. "Lady Whitmore," the voice again, acknowledging her without warmth. "I apologize for the late notice of my attendance. Lord Pemberton was insistent." "Not at all, Your Grace. You are most welcome." Rowena could picture her stepmother's performance, the practiced smile, the graceful curtsy, the careful calculation of every word and gesture. She wondered which duke had been ensnared into this evening's tedium. The season was well underway, and London's most eligible noblemen were typically overbooked with far more prestigious engagements. The party moved into the drawing-room, and Rowena returned to her chair by the window. The November night had turned the glass into a dark mirror, reflecting her own face back at her. She studied her reflection with detached interest, noting the way the candlelight softened her features, wondering what she might have looked like in a ball gown, with her hair properly dressed and jewels at her throat. An hour passed. The sounds of dinner filtered up from below, laughter, conversation, the clink of crystal and silver. Rowena had just decided to prepare for bed when she heard something unusual: footsteps in the hallway outside her rooms, accompanied by voices. "I assure you, Your Grace, there is nothing of interest on this floor." Lady Agatha's voice strained now with an edge of panic poorly concealed. "Merely storage rooms and servants' quarters." "Indeed?" The Duke's voice, closer now, laced with polite skepticism. "How curious. I could have sworn I saw candlelight from one of these windows when my carriage arrived." Rowena's heart began to race. She should extinguish her candles, retreat into darkness, make herself even more invisible than usual. But something, stubbornness perhaps, or simply exhaustion with her own erasure, kept her frozen in place. "The servants, Your Grace. They do keep odd hours." Lady Agatha was practically hissing now. "Servants who read Italian poetry." The Duke's tone carried a note of amusement. "I saw the book quite clearly through the window. Dante, unless I'm mistaken." Before Lady Agatha could respond, footsteps approached Rowena's door. She stood, her hands clenched at her sides, her pulse thundering in her ears. The door opened. The man who entered was not what she had expected. Dukes, in her limited experience, gleaned from books and overheard conversations, were supposed to be either elderly and pompous or young and dissolute. Eldwin Harrowick, the Duke of Thornfield, was neither. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of austere handsomeness that commanded attention rather than invited it. His features were sharply defined: high cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that looked unaccustomed to smiling. His eyes were the color of slate, and they possessed an intensity that made Rowena feel as though he could see directly through her skin to the thoughts beneath. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and he carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. He was also, Rowena knew without being told, the most dangerous man in London. She had heard whispers of the Duke of Thornfield, even in her isolation. The servants spoke of him in hushed tones, a man who had inherited his title at 20, after his father's sudden death, who had ruthlessly consolidated his power and fortune, who could ruin a man's reputation with a single word or elevate a nobody to prominence with equal ease. He was courted and feared in equal measure, and he attended society functions with the selectiveness of a king granting audiences. And he was standing in her room, studying her with those penetrating slate eyes. "Your Grace," Lady Agatha appeared behind him, her face pale with fury barely contained. "I must insist—" "You must insist on nothing, Lady Whitmore." Eldwin Harrowicks' voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I find myself curious about this young lady whom you failed to introduce, despite her obvious residence in your home." Rowena found her voice, surprised by its steadiness. "I am Rowena Calder, Your Grace." She executed a curtsy with the grace her mother had taught her years ago, before death had claimed her. "Forgive the intrusion upon your evening." One of his eyebrows rose fractionally. "The intrusion appears to be mine, Miss Calder. I was unaware that Lord Whitmore's household included a daughter of reading age, beyond the two young ladies currently terrifying my dining companions with their conversation." Despite everything, Rowena felt a smile tug at her lips. Millicent and Cordelia were indeed tedious conversationalists. "Stepdaughter, Your Grace," Lady Agatha interjected, her voice sharp. "From my first marriage. Rowena prefers the quiet of her rooms to society. She is of a decidedly scholarly disposition." "How fascinating!" The Duke's gaze never left Rowena's face. "And does this scholarly disposition extend to Italian literature? I noticed Dante by your window." "It does, Your Grace, along with French, some Greek, and a smattering of Spanish." "All self-taught, I presume?" "Yes, Your Grace." Something flickered in those slate eyes, respect perhaps, or intrigue. "Remarkable. And you find that Dante's vision of the Inferno resonates with your current circumstances, Miss Calder?" The question was pointed, deliberately so. Rowena felt Lady Agatha's panic radiating like heat from a fire. This was her moment, her single opportunity to speak truth to someone who might actually listen. She could remain silent, complicit in her own erasure, or she could answer honestly. She chose honesty. "I find, Your Grace, that Dante understood the nature of imprisonment quite well. The deepest circles of hell are reserved not for those who sin from passion, but for those who betray trust and manipulate others for personal gain." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Agatha had gone rigid, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Lord Whitmore, who had appeared in the hallway behind his wife, looked confused and uncomfortable. The Duke's expression remained impassive, but Rowena could have sworn she saw approval flash across his features. "A perceptive reading, Miss Calder. I wonder that you've been denied the opportunity to share such insights in broader company." "Your Grace, if you would return to the dining room," Lady Agatha began. "I find I've lost my appetite for this particular gathering, Lady Whitmore." Eldwin Harrowick turned to face her fully, and even Rowena felt the chill of his displeasure. "Tell me, how long has Miss Calder been residing in your household?" 5 years, Your Grace, since her father's passing." 5 years? And in that time, she has never been presented to society? Never attended a single ball or soirée? "As I mentioned, she prefers—" "What you mentioned, madam, was a convenient fiction." The Duke's voice could have frozen water. "What I observe is a young woman of quality, education and evident grace, who has been systematically hidden from society for reasons I can only assume serve your interests rather than hers." Lord Whitmore cleared his throat. "Your Grace, surely this is a family matter." "It becomes my matter when I discover such circumstances under my observation." Eldwin Harrowick's attention returned to Rowena. "Miss Calder, I find myself in need of an intelligent conversationalist for Lady Rothermere's ball tomorrow evening. Would you do me the honor of attending as my guest?" Rowena's breath caught. Lady Rothermere's ball was one of the season's most prestigious events. An invitation from the Duke of Thornfield was tantamount to a royal decree. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly—" Lady Agatha's voice had risen to a near shriek. "The question, Lady Whitmore, was not addressed to you." The Duke's gaze remained fixed on Rowena. "Miss Calder?" A thousand thoughts raced through Rowena's mind. Lady Agatha would make her life unbearable if she accepted, but her life was already unbearable. This might be her only chance to escape the shadows, to be seen, to exist as something more than a ghost in her own existence. "I would be honored, Your Grace." "Excellent. I shall send my carriage at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. I trust you have suitable attire." His eyes flickered to Lady Agatha with unmistakable meaning. "She has nothing appropriate for such an occasion," Lady Agatha said through clenched teeth. "Then I shall send my sister's modiste first thing in the morning. Lady Eleanor is approximately Miss Calder's size, and she has more gowns than one woman could wear in a lifetime." He turned back to Rowena. "Until tomorrow evening, Miss Calder. I look forward to discussing Dante's other works with you. I find his Paradiso particularly relevant to certain social transformations." With that, he nodded and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall with the finality of a judge's gavel. The moment he disappeared, Lady Agatha rounded on Rowena, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you? How dare you speak to His Grace in such a manner? You've embarrassed this family, you ungrateful—" "That will be quite enough, Agatha." Lord Whitmore's voice, rarely assertive, cut through his wife's tirade. "The Duke has extended an invitation. To refuse it would be a far greater embarrassment than anything Rowena has done." Lady Agatha turned on her husband, but whatever she saw in his expression made her close her mouth. Lord Whitmore was a mild man, easily influenced, but he was not a fool. He understood power when he saw it, and the Duke of Thornfield wielded more power than anyone else in London. To openly defy him would be social suicide. "You will attend this ball," Lord Whitmore continued, his eyes on Rowena. "You will conduct yourself with absolute propriety, and you will do nothing to further embarrass this household. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lord." He nodded and left, pulling Lady Agatha with him despite her protestations. Their voices faded down the hall, leaving Rowena alone in her room, trembling with emotions she could barely name. She had been seen. After 5 years of careful erasure, someone had looked at her and truly seen her. Not the inconvenient stepdaughter, not the potential rival, but a woman of intelligence and worth. And that someone was the most dangerous man in London. Rowena returned to her window, staring out at the darkness. Somewhere in that vast city, Eldwin Harrowick was returning to his own residence, plotting whatever machinations had prompted his invitation. She was not naive enough to believe his interest was purely altruistic. Men like the Duke of Thornfield did nothing without calculation, but neither was she foolish enough to reject the opportunity he had offered, whatever his motives, whatever dangers awaited her. Tomorrow evening she would step out of the shadows and into the light, and God help anyone who tried to push her back into the darkness. The night passed slowly. Rowena barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. When dawn finally broke, she heard the household stirring below, preparing for the arrival of the Duke's modiste. Lady Agatha would be furious, but she would play her role. She had no choice. The modiste arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, accompanied by 2 assistants and enough fabric and accessories to outfit a queen. Madame Laurent was a small, sharp-eyed Frenchwoman who took one look at Rowena and smiled with genuine pleasure. "Ah, mademoiselle, you will be magnifique. His Grace has excellent taste. Come, we must work quickly." The next few hours were a whirlwind of measurements, fabric selections, and fittings. Madame Laurent worked with the efficiency of a general commanding troops, her assistants following her orders with practiced precision. She had brought several gowns from Lady Eleanor's wardrobe, each more beautiful than the last, but none seemed to satisfy her exacting standards. "Non, non, this will not do. Mademoiselle needs something that speaks to her own character, not merely borrowed elegance." She studied Rowena with narrowed eyes, then snapped her fingers. "The emerald silk. Yes, it will bring out the gold in her eyes and complement her coloring perfectly." The emerald silk was breathtaking. Cut in the latest fashion, it featured a low neckline that would have scandalized Lady Agatha, a fitted bodice that emphasized Rowena's figure, and a skirt that fell in elegant folds to the floor. Madame Laurent made adjustments with pins and chalk, muttering in French about proportions and drape. "Your hair, mademoiselle," she said finally, stepping back to assess her work. "It must be dressed properly. I will send Lisette, Lady Eleanor's lady's maid. She is an artist with hair. Madame Laurent, I cannot possibly accept—" You can, and you will. His Grace's orders were very clear. You are to be presented at Lady Rothermere's ball as a young lady of quality and distinction. This is what you are, no? So we simply reveal what has been hidden. Rowena felt tears prick her eyes. Madame Laurent's kindness, matter-of-fact as it was, touched something deep within her. "Thank you," she whispered. The modiste patted her hand. "Merci is for small favors, mademoiselle. For justice, we simply say bon. Now gloves, slippers, reticule, all must be perfect." By the time Madame Laurent and her assistants departed, Rowena's room looked like a duchess's boudoir. The emerald gown hung on a dress form, catching the afternoon light with a shimmer that seemed almost magical. Matching slippers, long white gloves, and a delicate reticule embroidered with silver thread lay arranged on her bed. A small jewelry case contained a simple but elegant necklace of pearls and matching eardrops. Lady Agatha appeared in the doorway as Rowena was examining the jewelry, her face tight with suppressed fury. "Do not think, girl, that one evening will change your circumstances. The Duke of Thornfield is known for his unpredictability. This interest in you is merely a whim, an amusement. By week's end, you will be forgotten, and you will be back where you belong." Rowena met her stepmother's gaze steadily. "Perhaps, but for one evening I will exist in the world beyond these walls, and that is more than I've had in 5 years." "You ungrateful." "I am grateful, Lady Whitmore. Grateful to His Grace for his kindness, grateful to Madame Laurent for her skill, grateful to my father for teaching me that dignity is not conferred by circumstance, but claimed by character." Lady Agatha's hand twitched, and for a moment Rowena thought she might strike her. But even in her rage, Agatha knew better than to leave marks that might be visible at the ball. Instead, she turned on her heel and swept from the room, slamming the door behind her. Rowena released a shaky breath. The battle lines had been drawn. Whatever happened at Lady Rothermere's ball would determine not just one evening but potentially her entire future. Lisette arrived at 5 o'clock, a cheerful young woman with clever fingers and an artist's eye. She spent 2 hours transforming Rowena's hair from its simple arrangement into an elegant coiffure that somehow managed to be both fashionable and uniquely suited to Rowena's features. Small pearls were woven through the dark waves, catching the light with subtle brilliance. "His Grace will be pleased," Lisette said with satisfaction as she helped Rowena into the emerald gown. "You look every inch a lady, mademoiselle." When Rowena finally saw herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized her own reflection. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, elegant, refined, beautiful, in a way that transcended mere physical appearance. This was what she might have been all along, had Lady Agatha not stolen those years from her. The clock struck 8, and Rowena heard a carriage pull up outside. Her heart began to race. This was it. The moment that would either change everything or change nothing. She descended the stairs slowly, acutely aware that the entire household was watching. Lord Whitmore stood in the entrance hall, looking uncomfortable, but resigned. Millicent and Cordelia gawked from the drawing-room doorway, their faces masks of jealous disbelief. Lady Agatha was nowhere to be seen, having apparently chosen to absent herself from this particular humiliation. The butler opened the door, and there stood Eldwin Harrowick, Duke of Thornfield, dressed in impeccable evening attire that emphasized his austere elegance. His slate eyes widened fractionally as he took in Rowena's transformation, the only sign of surprise he permitted himself. "Miss Calder," he extended his hand. "You look magnificent." "Thank you, Your Grace. And thank you for your kindness in arranging all of this." "Kindness had little to do with it, I assure you." He led her to the carriage, handing her inside with practiced grace. "I find myself surrounded by insipid conversations and vapid company at these events. The prospect of intelligent discourse is worth any amount of effort." As the carriage pulled away from Grosvenor Square, Rowena looked back at the house that had been her prison for 5 years. Lady Agatha stood at an upper window, her face a pale blur of fury and fear. Rowena turned away, facing forward toward whatever awaited her. The Duke of Thornfield sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the dim carriage light. "You understand," he said quietly, "that there will be consequences to tonight. Society will take notice of you. Questions will be asked. Your stepmother's careful construction will collapse. I understand, Your Grace. And you're prepared for that? Rowena met his gaze directly. I have been invisible for 5 years, Your Grace. Whatever consequences arise from being seen cannot be worse than the slow death of erasure. Something shifted in his expression, respect, admiration, perhaps even a hint of warmth. No, he agreed, they cannot. The carriage rolled through the London streets toward Lady Rothermere's mansion, carrying Rowena toward a destiny she could not yet imagine. Behind her lay years of shadows and silence. Ahead lay the glittering, treacherous world of London society. And beside her, in the darkness of the carriage, sat the most dangerous man in London, the man who had chosen, for reasons yet unknown, to bring her into the light. Whatever his motives, whatever games he played, Rowena knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life would never be the same again. The shadows had released their hold, and there was no going back. Lady Rothermere's mansion blazed with light, every window a golden rectangle against the November darkness. Carriages lined the street in an elaborate procession, depositing London's most distinguished citizens at the entrance, where footmen in immaculate livery waited to receive them. The sound of music drifted through the night air, accompanied by the murmur of hundreds of conversations blending into a single elegant hum. Rowena's hands trembled slightly in her lap as their carriage joined the queue. The Duke of Thornfield noticed, as he seemed to notice everything, and spoke with unexpected gentleness. Nervousness is natural, Miss Calder, but remember that you have every right to be here. Your father was a gentleman of impeccable character, and you possess accomplishments that would put most of these ladies to shame. They will judge me nonetheless, Your Grace. They will judge you regardless of what you do or say. That is the nature of society. The question is whether you will permit their judgment to define you. He leaned forward slightly, his slate eyes intent. I did not bring you here to watch you shrink into the shadows again. I brought you here to claim what should have been yours all along. Before Rowena could respond, the carriage stopped at the entrance. A footman opened the door, and the Duke descended first, then turned to hand Rowena down. The moment her slippered foot touched the pavement, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The whispers began immediately. Who is that with Thornfield? I've never seen her before. My dear, look at that gown, clearly French and recent. But who is she? Eldwin Harrowick offered his arm with the same calm authority he brought to everything, and Rowena took it, lifting her chin in unconscious imitation of his own bearing. They ascended the marble steps together, and she was acutely aware of being the focus of intense scrutiny from everyone they passed. Lady Rothermere herself stood in the receiving line, a formidable woman in her 60s whose approval or disapproval could make or break a social reputation. Her eyes widened fractionally when she saw the Duke approaching with an unknown young woman on his arm. "Your Grace," she said, her curiosity barely concealed beneath polite formality, "what a pleasure to see you this evening. Lady Rothermere, may I present Miss Rowena Calder? Miss Calder, our gracious hostess, Lady Rothermere." Rowena executed a perfect curtsy, silently blessing her mother's training all those years ago. "Lady Rothermere, thank you for your hospitality this evening." "Miss Calder." Lady Rothermere's sharp eyes assessed her with the precision of a jeweler examining a stone of uncertain value. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance before." "No, my lady. I have been in mourning for my father these past 5 years." The lie came smoothly, born of necessity. It was far more acceptable to claim mourning than to admit she'd been deliberately hidden from society. "My condolences on your loss. And your family. I'm not familiar with the Calder name." "My father was Thomas Calder, my lady, a gentleman of Hertfordshire. My mother was Catherine Ashford before her marriage." Recognition flickered across Lady Rothermere's face. The Ashford name carried weight, even if Thomas Calder's had not. "Ah, yes, I knew your mother slightly. A lovely woman. You have her eyes." "Thank you, my lady." Lady Rothermere's expression softened fractionally, which was as close to approval as she typically offered. "Well, Miss Calder, I hope you enjoy the evening. And Your Grace, I trust you'll save me a dance later?" "It would be my honor, Lady Rothermere." They moved into the ballroom and Rowena felt as though she'd stepped into a dream. The room was enormous, its ceiling painted with elaborate frescoes of classical scenes, its walls hung with gilt-framed mirrors that multiplied the candlelight from dozens of crystal chandeliers. Ladies in gowns of every conceivable color swirled across the polished floor in the arms of gentlemen in severe black evening dress. The orchestra occupied a raised platform at one end of the room, their music soaring above the conversation. It was overwhelming and magnificent and utterly foreign to everything Rowena had known for the past 5 years. "Breathe, Miss Calder," the Duke murmured. "You look as though you've forgotten how." She laughed, surprising herself. "I feel as though I've stepped into one of my novels, Your Grace. I'm half convinced I'll wake up in my room to find this was all a dream. I assure you this is quite real, though I'll grant you that society often resembles fiction more than reality." He guided her along the edge of the ballroom, nodding to acquaintances but not stopping. "We're being watched quite intensely. Every gossip in London is trying to determine who you are and what your connection to me might be." "And what should I tell them if asked?" "The truth, as much as it suits you. You are the daughter of Thomas Calder, lately out of mourning, currently residing with your stepmother, Lady Whitmore. I encountered you at a small gathering and found your conversation refreshing enough to extend this invitation." His eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. "The fact that Lady Whitmore has kept you hidden will become obvious soon enough, but there's no need to volunteer the information." They were interrupted by a jovial voice. "Thornfield! By God, man, I've been looking for you everywhere." Lord Pemberton approached, red-faced and expansive, with a striking young woman on his arm. "May I present my niece, Miss Charlotte Pemberton? Charlotte, this is the Duke of Thornfield, whom I've mentioned." Miss Pemberton was beautiful in the conventional sense, golden hair, blue eyes, porcelain skin, and she gazed at the Duke with poorly concealed interest. "Your Grace, what a pleasure." "Miss Pemberton." Eldwin's bow was correct but cool. "May I present Miss Rowena Calder? Miss Calder, Lord Pemberton and his niece." Charlotte Pemberton's eyes swept over Rowena with the dismissive assessment of someone secure in her own superiority. "Miss Calder, how lovely. I don't believe we've met before." "No, we have not." Rowena matched her tone precisely, sweet and meaningless. "Miss Calder has been in mourning," the Duke interjected smoothly. "But she is now returned to society, and I'm endeavouring to ensure she enjoys her first ball in quite some time." "How charitable of you, Your Grace." Charlotte's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though I'm sure Miss Calder appreciates your condescension in taking time from more important acquaintances." The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Rowena felt anger flash through her, but before she could respond, the Duke's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "I find, Miss Pemberton, that importance is often inversely proportional to one's need to assert it. Miss Calder requires no condescension, as her company is vastly preferable to much of what passes for conversation in these gatherings." He turned to Rowena. "Miss Calder, I believe the next dance is forming. Would you do me the honor?" "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As they walked away, Rowena heard Charlotte's indignant whisper to her uncle. The Duke's expression remained impassive, but she could have sworn she saw satisfaction in the set of his shoulders. "You needn't have defended me quite so forcefully, Your Grace," Rowena said quietly. "I can manage cutting remarks." "I have no doubt. But Miss Pemberton has been attempting to secure my attention for 3 seasons now, and I find her persistence tedious. Your presence provides an excellent excuse to discourage her further efforts." They took their positions for the waltz, and Rowena felt a moment of panic. She had learned the steps from a book and practiced them alone in her room, but she had never actually waltzed with a partner. The Duke must have sensed her hesitation. "Follow my lead, Miss Calder. I promise not to let you stumble." The music began, and his hand settled at her waist with confident precision. For the first few measures, Rowena concentrated intensely on the steps, terrified of making a mistake. But gradually she began to relax into the rhythm, trusting the Duke's guidance. He was an excellent dancer, leading with subtle pressure that made the complicated movements feel natural. "You're doing beautifully," he said, "for someone who learned from books." "How did you know?" "Your focus is entirely on technique rather than performance. It's the mark of self-teaching." He spun her through a turn with effortless grace, But you have natural ability. With practice, you'll surpass most of the ladies here." They danced in silence for a moment, and Rowena became aware of the whispers surrounding them. Every eye in the ballroom seemed fixed on their partnership. The Duke of Thornfield rarely danced, and never with unknown young ladies of uncertain provenance. "You're causing quite the scandal, Your Grace," Rowena observed. "Good. Society thrives on scandal. Without it, these gatherings would be unbearably dull." He met her eyes directly. "Besides, I have my own reasons for ensuring you're noticed." "And what reasons might those be?" "In time, Miss Calder. For now, simply enjoy the evening." The waltz ended, and the Duke escorted her from the floor. Immediately, they were surrounded by curious acquaintances, all eager to be introduced to the mysterious young woman who had captured the Duke's attention. Rowena found herself swept into a whirlwind of conversations, each more exhausting than the last. There was Lady Ashworth, who had known Rowena's mother and expressed elaborate condolences. There was the Honourable Mr. Fitzwilliam, who asked her to dance and proceeded to bore her with stories of his hunting exploits. There was Mrs. Cavendish, who interrogated her about her family connections with the subtlety of an inquisitor. Through it all, the Duke remained nearby, a silent but formidable presence that kept the more aggressive social predators at bay. By the time supper was announced, Rowena's head was spinning. She had been introduced to more people in 3 hours than she'd met in the previous 5 years, names and faces blurred together in a kaleidoscope of silk, jewels, and carefully crafted smiles. The Duke guided her to supper with the same proprietary care he'd shown all evening. They were seated at a small table with Lord and Lady Stratford, an older couple who treated Rowena with genuine kindness rather than curiosity. "Your first ball, Miss Calder?" Lady Stratford asked gently. "In many years, yes, my lady." "It can be overwhelming, I know, but you're managing beautifully. I've been watching you navigate the social waters with considerable grace." "Thank you, my lady. Though I confess I feel rather like a swimmer who's been thrown into the ocean and told to reach the shore." Lady Stratford laughed. "An apt metaphor, but you have an excellent guide in His Grace. There's no one better positioned to ensure your safe arrival." Rowena glanced at the Duke, who was engaged in conversation with Lord Stratford about some political matter. She wondered again at his motives. Men like Eldwin Harrowick did nothing without purpose, and she could not believe that his interest in her was purely humanitarian. After supper, as they returned to the ballroom, the Duke was claimed by Lady Rothermere for the dance he'd promised. Rowena found herself standing alone for the first time that evening, acutely aware of the stares and whispers. A voice spoke from behind her. "Miss Calder, isn't it?" She turned to find a gentleman of perhaps 30, with kind brown eyes and an open, friendly expression. "Yes, sir." "Edmund Waverley, at your service. I'm a friend of Thornfield's, though he'd probably dispute the term friend." He smiled. He prefers acquaintance or occasional associate. Despite her nervousness, Rowena found herself smiling back. He does seem to prefer precision in language. "Among other things, would you care to dance? I promise to be less tedious than Fitzwilliam was. I saw your expression during his hunting stories. You have an excellent talent for concealing boredom." "You were watching me?" "Everyone was watching you, Miss Calder. You arrived on Thornfield's arm, which is news enough. The fact that he's barely left your side all evening is unprecedented." They took their positions for a country dance, and Rowena found Edmund Waverley to be an easy companion. He made her laugh with witty observations about the other guests and asked intelligent questions about her interests without prying into her personal circumstances. "You read Italian, I understand," he said, as they came together in the dance. "I do. How did you know?" "Thornfield mentioned it." He was quite impressed, which is saying something. He's not easily impressed. "And you, Mr. Waverley? What are your accomplishments?" "Nothing so elevated as Italian literature, I'm afraid. I dabble in architecture and spend far too much time arguing with Thornfield about political philosophy. He's a Tory to his bones, and I'm decidedly more progressive in my views." "How do you manage to remain friends if you disagree so fundamentally?" "Because Thornfield, for all his austere exterior, respects genuine conviction. He'd rather argue with someone who holds opposing views sincerely than agree with someone who simply echoes his opinions." Edmund smiled. Besides, I think he finds most of society boring. At least I provide entertainment. The dance ended, and Edmund returned her to the edge of the ballroom. The Duke reappeared moments later, his expression unreadable as he assessed Edmund. "Waverley, I see you've been entertaining Miss Calder in my absence." "Someone had to, Thornfield. You can't monopolize the most interesting woman at the ball all evening." Edmund bowed to Rowena. "Miss Calder, it's been a pleasure. I hope we'll meet again soon." As Edmund walked away, the Duke turned to Rowena. "I hope Waverley wasn't too forward." "Not at all. He was quite charming." The Duke's tone suggested skepticism. "Waverley's charm is legendary, and frequently deployed with ulterior motives, as opposed to your own motives, Your Grace, which are entirely transparent." For the first time that evening, Eldwin Harrowick actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his austere features into something almost approachable. "Touché, Miss Calder. I see that your time in isolation has not dulled your wit." "On the contrary, Your Grace. Isolation provided excellent opportunity for sharpening it." They were interrupted by the arrival of Lady Agatha and Lord Whitmore, accompanied by Millicent and Cordelia. Rowena felt her stomach tighten. She had known this confrontation was inevitable, but she had hoped to delay it until after the ball. "Your Grace." Lady Agatha's curtsy was perfect, her smile fixed. "How delightful to see you again. I trust Rowena has not been too much of a burden on your evening?" "On the contrary, Lady Whitmore. Miss Calder has proven to be the most accomplished partner I've had the pleasure of conversing with in quite some time." Lady Agatha's smile tightened fractionally. "How kind of you to say so, Your Grace. I hope she has properly expressed her gratitude for your generosity in extending this invitation." "Her gratitude is unnecessary. The pleasure has been entirely mine." Millicent stepped forward, her expression petulant. "Your Grace, I was hoping you might have time for a dance. I've been practicing the quadrilles specifically for this evening." The Duke's expression returned to its usual impassivity. "I'm afraid my dances are all spoken for this evening, Miss Whitmore. Perhaps another time." It was a polite dismissal, and Millicent had no choice but to accept it with an approximation of grace. Cordelia wisely remained silent, though her jealous glare at Rowena spoke volumes. Lord Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, we shall leave you to enjoy the evening. Rowena, I trust you'll be ready to depart when the family does." Before Rowena could answer, the Duke spoke. "Actually, Lord Whitmore, I had planned to escort Miss Calder home myself. That is, if she has no objection." Every head within earshot turned toward them. The implications of the Duke personally escorting Rowena home were clear to everyone present. It was a declaration of special interest, a public statement that would be discussed in every drawing room in London by morning. Lady Agatha's face went pale. "Your Grace, surely that's not necessary. I insist, Lady Whitmore. After all, Miss Calder came as my guest. It would be remiss of me not to see her safely home." There was nothing Lady Agatha could say without appearing ungracious or worse, appearing to question the Duke's intentions. She managed a stiff nod. "Of course, Your Grace. How very thoughtful." The Whitmore family departed shortly after, leaving Rowena alone with the Duke once more. She could feel the weight of every eye in the ballroom upon them. "You realize what you've just done, Your Grace? Ensured that you won't be subjected to Lady Whitmore's rage in a closed carriage?" "Yes, I'm quite aware." "You've also ensured that by tomorrow morning all of London will be speculating about your interest in me." "Yes." He offered his arm. "Shall we dance again? I find I'm enjoying causing a stir." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, conversation, and increasingly bold speculation. Rowena danced with several other gentlemen. Edmund Waverley claimed her twice more, and she was sought out by Lord Stratford and several others, but the Duke remained her constant companion between dances. His attention was unmistakable and deliberate, and the social implications grew more obvious with each passing hour. Finally, as midnight approached, the Duke suggested they depart. "You've had a long evening, Miss Calder, and I suspect tomorrow will bring its own challenges." His carriage was brought around, and they settled into the plush interior for the journey back to Grosvenor Square. Rowena leaned back against the cushions, suddenly exhausted. The evening's emotions crashed over her: exhilaration, Fear, triumph, uncertainty, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't begin to unravel. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said quietly, "for everything. Tonight was overwhelming, magical, terrifying, real." She met his eyes in the dim carriage light. "I existed tonight. People saw me, spoke to me, acknowledged my presence. You cannot know what that means after 5 years of being invisible." "I think perhaps I can." His expression was thoughtful. "I was 12 when my father died, and I inherited the title. Everyone saw me, but no one truly looked. They saw the Duke of Thornfield, a child with more power than wisdom, a title to be manipulated or appeased. It took me years to learn the difference between being seen and being understood." It was the most personal thing he'd said all evening, and Rowena felt a shift in the air between them. "And have you found someone who understands you, Your Grace?" "Very few. Waverley to some extent, though he'd be horrified to hear me admit it. My sister Eleanor when she's not vexing me with her own romantic entanglements." He paused. "And perhaps you, Miss Calder. You see through pretense rather efficiently. Years of observation from the shadows, Your Grace. It teaches one to recognize performance versus authenticity." The carriage rolled to a stop outside the Grosvenor Square residence. Every window was dark, except for one on the 3rd floor, Rowena's room, where a single candle burned. "Lady Whitmore is waiting up for you," the Duke observed. "Undoubtedly. I imagine she has quite a lot to say about this evening's events. Will you be all right?" The concern in his voice surprised her. "I've survived her displeasure for 5 years, Your Grace. I think I can manage one more night. Nevertheless," he reached into his coat and withdrew a card. "This is my sister's address. If at any point you find your circumstances intolerable, send word to Lady Eleanor. She will provide assistance." Rowena took the card, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Your Grace, but I cannot run to your sister every time my stepmother is displeased with me." "No, but you can run to her if your stepmother makes your life unbearable. There's a difference." He descended from the carriage and handed her down. "Miss Calder, tonight was merely the beginning. What comes next will be far more complicated." "What do you mean?" "Society has taken notice of you. You cannot be erased again. Not after this. Lady Whitmore will realize that her control over you has been compromised. She will either accept the change or fight it, and my observation suggests she's not one to accept anything gracefully. So what should I do?" "Stand firm. You've been given a weapon tonight. Visibility. Use it. And if you need allies in the battles to come, remember that you have them." He bowed over her hand, his lips barely brushing her glove. "Until we meet again, Miss Calder, I have a feeling it will be soon." The carriage pulled away, leaving Rowena standing alone on the pavement. She looked up at the house, at the lit window where Lady Agatha surely waited with fury and recriminations. But Rowena was no longer afraid. She had tasted freedom tonight, had felt the intoxicating power of being seen and acknowledged. Whatever consequences awaited her, they were worth it. She climbed the steps and entered the house, ready to face whatever came next. The shadows had released her, and she would not return to them willingly. Part 3. Expanded version. The confrontation Rowena expected that night never came. When she entered the house, the hallway was empty, silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. She climbed the stairs to her room, every muscle tense with anticipation, but no one emerged to block her path. Lady Agatha's door remained firmly closed. The silence was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. Rowena changed out of the emerald gown with Lisette's help, the lady's maid's eyes bright with curiosity about the evening. But Lisette was too well trained to ask questions, and Rowena was too exhausted to volunteer information. When she was finally alone, dressed in her nightgown with her hair unpinned, she sat by the window and stared out at the darkened square. The ball felt like a dream now, distant and unreal. Had she truly waltzed with the Duke of Thornfield? Had all those people actually looked at her, spoken to her, acknowledged her existence? She touched her lips, remembering the feel of his hand at her waist, the intensity of his slate-grey eyes, the protective way he'd positioned himself between her and society's more vicious predators. What game was he playing? Men like Eldwin Harrowick didn't rescue unknown young women from obscurity without reason. Yet she could detect no obvious motive beyond what he'd stated, a preference for intelligent conversation over vapid small talk. It seemed insufficient explanation for the social risk he'd taken by championing her so publicly. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and filled with fragmented dreams of candlelight and music. She woke late the next morning to find a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant and precise. Miss Calder, my brother has informed me of your circumstances. I'm hosting a small tea this afternoon at 3 o'clock and would be delighted if you could attend. A carriage will call for you at 2:30. Please do come. I suspect we have much to discuss. Lady Eleanor Ashford. Rowena read the note 3 times, her heart racing. Lady Eleanor Ashford was the Duke's sister, a widow of impeccable reputation who was known throughout London for her intelligence and independence. An invitation from her was both an honour and a potential lifeline. The question was whether Lady Agatha would permit her to accept. Rowena dressed carefully in one of her simple day dresses, not the finery Madame Laurent had provided, but something that had belonged to her before the ball, before everything changed. She needed to remind herself that beneath the silk and pearls, she was still Rowena Calder, still the same woman who had survived 5 years of systematic erasure. She descended to the breakfast room, where she found her stepmother already seated with the morning newspapers spread before her. Lady Agatha's face was perfectly composed, but her eyes held a cold fury that made Rowena's skin prickle. "Good morning, Rowena." The words were pleasant enough, but the tone could have frozen water. "Good morning, Lady Whitmore. I trust you enjoyed your evening?" "I did, thank you." Lady Agatha set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "How gratifying. Of course, you realize that the Duke's attention was merely a momentary whim. Men of his station amuse themselves with novelties, but they quickly return to their own sphere. By next week, he will have forgotten you entirely." Rowena helped herself to toast from the sideboard, keeping her voice level. "Perhaps, but even a week of being seen is preferable to years of invisibility." "Is it?" Lady Agatha's smile was sharp. "You have no idea what you've set in motion, foolish girl. Society is not kind to those who rise above their station. You will be scrutinized, judged, and very likely found wanting. Your father's modest origins will be examined, your lack of fortune noted, your absence from society for the past 5 years questioned. Do you truly believe you can withstand that scrutiny? I survived 5 years of your cruelty, Lady Whitmore. I imagine I can manage society's judgment." The mask of civility slipped for just a moment, and Rowena saw the raw hatred beneath. Then Lady Agatha regained control, her expression smoothing into polite indifference. "Well, we shall see. I assume you'll be spending the day in your rooms as usual?" This was the moment. Rowena took a breath and withdrew Lady Eleanor's note from her pocket. "Actually, I've been invited to tea with Lady Eleanor Ashford this afternoon. A carriage will call for me at 2:30. Lady Agatha's hand clenched around her teacup. "Lady Eleanor Ashford, the Duke's sister." "Yes." "I see. And you intend to accept this invitation?" "I do." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Finally, Lady Agatha spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Very well, but understand this, Rowena. While you are under this roof, you remain subject to my authority. The Duke's interest may protect you in society, but it does not extend to what happens within these walls. Remember that." It was a clear threat, and they both knew it, but Rowena had gone too far to retreat now. "I understand perfectly, Lady Whitmore." She finished her breakfast in silence and retreated to her room to prepare for the afternoon. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Rowena tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. She attempted needlework, but her hands trembled too much to manage the delicate stitches. Finally, she simply sat by the window, watching the street below and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. At precisely 2:30, a carriage bearing the Ashford crest pulled up outside. Rowena descended the stairs to find Lady Agatha watching from the drawing-room doorway, her expression unreadable. Millicent and Cordelia peered from behind their mother, their faces twisted with jealousy and resentment. The carriage took her through the fashionable streets of Mayfair to an elegant townhouse with window boxes overflowing with late-season flowers. A butler ushered her into a drawing room decorated with exquisite taste, comfortable rather than ostentatious, filled with books and art that suggested the owner's genuine interests rather than mere social display. Lady Eleanor Ashford rose to greet her, and Rowena found herself face to face with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to her brother. The same slate-grey eyes, the same aristocratic features, but softened by warmth and genuine welcome. "Miss Calder, how delightful to finally meet you. Eldwin has spoken of nothing else since last night." Lady Eleanor took both of Rowena's hands in hers, her smile radiant. "Please sit. We have so much to discuss, and I want to hear everything." Over tea and delicate pastries, Rowena found herself telling Lady Eleanor the truth about her circumstances, the years of isolation, Lady Agatha's calculated cruelty, the systematic erasure of her existence from society. The words poured out of her in a torrent she couldn't control, 5 years of silence finally breaking open. Lady Eleanor listened with growing outrage, her teacup forgotten in her lap. "That woman should be horsewhipped," she declared when Rowena finished. "To hide you away like that? To deny you your rightful place in society? It's monstrous. Absolutely monstrous. And your stepsisters, those insipid girls, being paraded about while you were locked away like some shameful secret." "Your brother seems to think I can reclaim what was taken from me," Rowena said quietly, "but I'm not certain how, or even if it's truly possible. Society has rules, expectations. I've been absent for so long that I barely know how to navigate their world." "Then we shall teach you, not the false rules that govern superficial interactions, but the real mechanisms of power and influence." Lady Eleanor leaned forward, her expression intense. "Society is not as rigid as it appears, Miss Calder. It bends for those who understand how to apply pressure in the right places, and with Eldwin's support and mine, you'll have all the leverage you need. But I must ask, Miss Calder, what do you want? Not what others want for you, but what you truly desire for yourself." No one had ever asked Rowena that question before. She sat in silence for a long moment, truly considering. What did she want? Freedom, certainly. Recognition, undoubtedly. But beyond that? "I want freedom," she said finally. "Freedom to make my own choices, to live my own life, to be seen and acknowledged as a person of worth. I don't need wealth or a grand marriage or social prominence for its own sake. I simply want the right to exist on my own terms, to use my mind, to contribute something meaningful to the world rather than being decorative or invisible." "Then we shall ensure you have it." Lady Eleanor's smile was fierce. "Starting today, you'll attend the theatre with me tomorrow evening. I have a box, and we'll make certain you're seen by everyone who matters. Then there's the Hartley musicale on Thursday, and Lady Ashworth's garden party on Saturday, and the Pemberton dinner next Tuesday. We'll fill your calendar so completely that Lady Whitmore won't have time to interfere or undermine you." "But why would you do this for me? We've only just met." "Because Eldwin asked me to, and I trust my brother's judgment implicitly. He's never been wrong about people, not once. Also because I've seen what society can do to women who lack protection and advocacy. My own marriage was arranged without my consent when I was 18 to a man 30 years my senior. He was kind enough in his way, but I had no choice in the matter, no voice in determining my own future." Lady Eleanor's expression softened with old pain. "I know what it is to lack control over one's own destiny, Miss Calder. I wouldn't wish that powerlessness on anyone." Rowena felt tears prick her eyes. After so many years of isolation and cruelty, this unexpected kindness threatened to overwhelm her defenses. "Thank you, Lady Eleanor. I don't know how to repay such generosity." "Nonsense. No repayment is necessary. Simply promise me you'll stand firm against whatever Lady Whitmore attempts. She'll try to undermine you, to convince you that you don't belong in society, that you're reaching above your station. Don't believe her lies." The afternoon passed quickly in pleasant conversation. Lady Eleanor was intelligent, witty, and refreshingly direct. She spoke candidly about her brother, painting a picture of a man who was far more complex than his austere public persona suggested. Eldwin learned early that showing emotion was perceived as weakness, she explained, pouring more tea. Our father was a cold, calculating man who valued power above all else. He saw affection as a liability, compassion as foolishness. When he died and Eldwin inherited at such a young age, the vultures descended immediately. Other nobles tried to manipulate him, to control his fortune and influence, to marry him off to their daughters for their own gain. He survived by becoming harder, more calculating, more impenetrable than anyone around him. "But he's not truly cold, is he?" Rowena asked softly. "No. Beneath that icy exterior is a man of deep conviction and surprising compassion. He simply chooses very carefully who sees that side of him." Lady Eleanor smiled knowingly. "The fact that he's chosen to reveal it to you is significant, Miss Calder. My brother does nothing by half measures. If he's decided to champion your cause, he will see it through to the end, regardless of what obstacles emerge." When Rowena finally returned to Grosvenor Square that evening, she found the household in turmoil. Invitations had begun arriving, not just one or two, but dozens. Word of her appearance at Lady Rothermere's ball had spread through London's social circles with remarkable speed, and suddenly everyone wanted to meet the mysterious young woman who had captured the Duke of Thornfield's attention. Lady Agatha stood in the entrance hall, surrounded by cream-coloured cards bearing the crests of London's most prestigious families. Her face was pale with barely suppressed rage, her hands trembling as she sorted through the pile. "It seems you've created quite a sensation," she said coldly as Rowena entered. "These invitations are addressed to you personally. I cannot refuse them without causing offence to some of the most influential families in London." Rowena felt triumph surge through her. This was what the Duke had meant about visibility being a weapon. Once society had noticed her, Lady Agatha could no longer hide her away without explaining why, and any explanation would expose her own cruelty and manipulation. "How fortunate," Rowena said calmly, taking several of the invitations from the hall table. "I shall endeavour to bring credit to the family name at each occasion." "See that you do. And remember, Rowena, one misstep, one scandal, and all of this will be taken from you as quickly as it was given. Society is unforgiving of those who don't truly belong." But Lady Agatha's threats rang hollow now. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and they both knew it. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of social engagements. Rowena attended the theatre with Lady Eleanor, where they were visited in their box by a steady stream of curious society figures eager to assess the newcomer. She performed beautifully at the Hartley musical, playing Mozart on the pianoforte, with a skill that surprised everyone except those who understood how much time she'd had to practice in isolation. At Lady Ashworth's garden party, she conversed easily about literature and politics, demonstrating an education that far exceeded what most young ladies possessed. Through it all, the Duke of Thornfield remained a constant presence. He didn't monopolize her time. That would have been too obvious, too likely to cause scandal before they were ready. But he appeared at every event she attended, always finding moments to speak with her privately, to ensure she was managing the social waters successfully, to offer subtle guidance when she seemed uncertain. Their conversations deepened with each encounter. They discussed Dante and Milton, debated the merits of various political philosophies, explored questions of duty versus desire, the nature of power, and the obligations of privilege. Rowena found herself looking forward to these exchanges with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She had never met anyone whose mind matched hers so perfectly, whose observations were so sharp, whose silences were as meaningful as his words. She realized with growing alarm, falling in love with him. It was foolish, dangerous, almost certainly doomed. The Duke of Thornfield was one of England's most powerful men, courted by every ambitious family with marriageable daughters. She was nobody, a gentleman's daughter with no fortune, no connections beyond what he had provided, no claim to his world beyond his temporary patronage. When his interest inevitably waned, she would be left alone again, but this time with the far worse pain of having tasted something she could never truly possess. But her heart, it seemed, had no interest in logic or self-preservation. One evening, at a ball hosted by the Duchess of Pembroke, Rowena found herself alone on a terrace overlooking moonlit gardens. She had escaped the crowded ballroom for a moment of quiet, needing to gather her thoughts away from the constant performance society demanded. The music drifted through the open doors behind her, a waltz she recognized, and she closed her eyes against the sudden ache of longing. She didn't hear him approach, but suddenly the Duke was there beside her, his presence as solid and reassuring as stone. "You're managing remarkably well," he said without preamble. "Society has embraced you far more quickly than I anticipated. You've become quite the sensation. Thanks to you and Lady Eleanor. Without your sponsorship, I would still be invisible." Sponsorship can open doors, Miss Calder, but it cannot create the qualities that make people want to keep those doors open. Your intelligence, your grace, your refusal to be diminished by circumstance, these are what have secured your place, not my influence. She turned to face him, emboldened by the darkness and the privacy of the terrace. "Why did you do it, Your Grace, truly? I still don't understand what prompted you to intervene in my circumstances. You could have walked away from that dinner party and forgotten you'd ever seen me." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the gardens below. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Because I saw myself in you, Miss Calder. Not the circumstances, but the core of it. The sense of being trapped by others' expectations and manipulations, of having your true self hidden behind layers of pretense and protection. I spent years learning to wield power in a world that wanted to control me for their own purposes. You spent years maintaining your dignity in a world that wanted to erase you entirely. I recognized that strength, that refusal to be broken. And I thought perhaps you deserved the opportunity to exercise it in a broader arena. That's all. No." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his slate-grey eyes made her breath catch. "That's not all. From the moment I saw you in that room, surrounded by books and defiance, refusing to be cowed by your stepmother's fury, I was captivated. You were nothing like the simpering debutantes and calculating social climbers I'm subjected to endlessly. You were real, Miss Calder, genuine in a way that is exceedingly rare in my world, and I found myself wanting more of that reality, more of you." Her heart was racing now, her hands trembling where they gripped the terrace balustrade. "Your Grace, Eldwin. My name is Eldwin, and I would very much like to hear you say it without titles or formality between us. Eldwin." The name felt intimate on her tongue, a bridge across the vast distance between their stations, their worlds. He stepped closer, and Rowena could feel the heat radiating from him despite the cool evening air. "I'm not a man who acts impulsively, Rowena. Everything I do is calculated, measured, strategic. I've built my life on careful planning and the ruthless pursuit of specific goals. But from the moment I met you, strategy has warred with something far more primitive and powerful. I find myself thinking of you constantly. Your wit, your courage, the way you refuse to be diminished despite everything that's been done to you, the light in your eyes when you discuss ideas that excite you." "What are you saying?" She barely recognized her own voice, breathless and uncertain. "I'm saying that I brought you into society with the intention of giving you freedom and opportunity, of righting an injustice I'd accidentally discovered. But somewhere along the way, my motives became far more selfish. I want you visible not just for your sake, but for mine. I want the right to stand beside you publicly, to claim your time and attention, to make it clear to every man in London that you are not available for their pursuit. Because you want me for yourself." Yes. The single word was weighted with absolute certainty. "I want you for myself, Rowena Calder. Not as a mistress or a temporary amusement, but as my wife, as the Duchess of Thornfield, as my partner in all things." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because I'm nobody. A gentleman's daughter with no fortune, no connections beyond what you've given me, no claim to the kind of life you're describing. Society will never accept it. They'll say you married beneath you, that I trapped you somehow, that I'm a fortune hunter who manipulated. Let them say what they wish. I've never cared for society's opinion, and I don't intend to start now." He took her hands in his, and Rowena felt the warmth of his touch even through her gloves. "I'm asking you, Rowena, will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not as decoration or social obligation, but as my partner, my equal, my choice? Will you bring your brilliance and strength into my life permanently?" She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being yearned to accept, to step into the future he was offering. But doubt held her back. Years of manipulation making her question even genuine feeling. How can I be certain this is real? How do I know this isn't just another form of manipulation, another powerful person using me for their own purposes? You can't be certain, not completely. That's the nature of trust, Rowena. It requires a leap of faith, a willingness to be vulnerable. His grip on her hands tightened. But I can tell you this. I have never asked another woman to marry me. I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that this choice was the right one for both of us. I will value your mind, respect your opinions, support your ambitions. You will never be invisible again, never be silenced or diminished, I swear it. Rowena looked into his eyes and saw truth there, raw, vulnerable, unmistakable. This man who had armored himself against the world was opening that armor for her, offering her the one thing he guarded most carefully, his heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Eldwin." He smiled then, a genuine expression of joy that transformed his entire face from austere to almost boyish. Thank God. I was prepared to argue my case all evening if necessary. I had at least a dozen more persuasive points ready. That won't be required, though I reserve the right to argue with you about other matters in the future. I would be disappointed if you didn't. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each one through the glove with reverent tenderness. We should return to the ballroom and make the announcement before someone discovers us here and assumes the worst. Now? Tonight? Why wait? Let society know immediately that you are claimed, protected, beyond their speculation and manipulation. His eyes glinted with something that might have been mischief. Besides, I find I quite enjoy causing scandals where you're concerned. The shocked expressions alone are worth any amount of social inconvenience. They returned to the ballroom hand in hand, and the sight of them together, the Duke of Thornfield and the mysterious Miss Calder, clearly intimate, clearly decided, sent shock waves through the assembled guests. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Fans froze mid-flutter. The orchestra played on oblivious, but no one was dancing anymore. The Duke called for silence with nothing more than his commanding presence, and the music faltered to a stop. In the sudden quiet, his voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement. Miss Rowena Calder has done me the extraordinary honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. I trust you will all join me in celebrating this happy occasion." The response was mixed. Some guests offered genuine congratulations, delighted by the romantic turn of events and the obvious affection between them. Edmund Waverley actually whooped with joy, earning scandalized looks from the more staid attendees. Lady Eleanor, who had been watching from across the room, smiled with deep satisfaction. But others whispered behind their fans, calculating the implications, questioning Rowena's suitability, wondering what hold she could possibly have over the notoriously particular Duke. But no one dared voice open disapproval, not with the Duke's slate-grey eyes daring them to challenge his choice. Lady Agatha, who had been in attendance with Millicent and Cordelia, looked as though she might faint. All her careful plans, all her manipulation and control, all her years of keeping Rowena hidden away, had led to this moment. Her stepdaughter elevated beyond anything she could have imagined, forever beyond her reach and control. The girl she'd tried to erase would become one of the most powerful women in England. Rowena caught her stepmother's eye across the ballroom and smiled. It was not a kind smile, but it was genuine. She had won, not through deception or manipulation, but through simple persistence, through refusing to let cruelty define her worth or determine her future. The Duke had brought her into the light, but she had chosen to stay there, to claim her place, to fight for her own visibility and worth. And now she would stand beside him, not as a rescued damsel or a grateful dependent, but as his equal partner in all things. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in a ceremony that became the talk of London for years to come. Rowena wore a gown of ivory silk, that Lady Eleanor had helped her select, embroidered with pearls that caught the light like captured stars. She walked down the aisle of St. George's Church with her head high and her heart full, passing rows of London's most distinguished citizens who had come to witness the impossible, the Duke of Thornfield marrying a nobody for love. The Duke waited for her at the altar, his expression solemn, but his eyes warm with promises for their future. When she reached his side, he took her hand with unmistakable tenderness. The vicar began the ceremony, his words washing over them like a blessing. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, silence reigned. Even Lady Agatha, seated rigidly in her pew, said nothing. She had no power here, no ability to stop what was happening. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Eldwin kissed her with a thoroughness that made the assembled guests gasp and whisper and smile. But Rowena didn't care about their reactions. She was no longer the invisible girl hidden in the shadows. She was the Duchess of Thornfield, wife to the most powerful man in London, partner to a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. That evening, at the wedding breakfast held at Thornfield House, Lady Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. "To Rowena," she said, her voice ringing through the room with absolute conviction, "who reminds us all that true worth cannot be hidden, dignity cannot be destroyed, and love recognizes value regardless of circumstance or station. May your marriage be filled with joy, partnership, intellectual challenge, and the freedom you both deserve." Rowena looked around the room, at the faces of society's elite who had once ignored her existence, at Lady Agatha standing stiffly in a corner with her disappointed daughters, at Edmund Waverley grinning broadly and raising his glass enthusiastically, at Lady Eleanor wiping tears of joy from her eyes. And beside her always Eldwin's steady presence, his hand warm in hers, his love a constant fortress against any storm. She had been kept in the shadows for so long, deliberately erased from the world. But the shadows had released her at last, and she would never, ever return to them again. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on Rowena and Eldwin's journey from darkness into light, from invisibility to love, from isolation to partnership. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Rowena's pain and celebrated her triumph, we would be so grateful if you would take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment telling us what you loved most about their romance, and give this video a like. And please don't forget to activate your notifications so you never miss another beautiful love story from Echoes of Romance. Your support means absolutely everything to us, and it helps us continue bringing you these sweeping tales of love, courage, and triumph over adversity. Until next time, may you always find the light, even in the darkest of shadows, and may you never let anyone make you invisible. With love and gratitude, Echoes of Romance.